My name is Amelia Moore, and at 29 years old. The first time I saw Matthew, I swear the room tilted slightly, just enough for the edges of my world to blur. It was my friend Melissa's housewarming 2 years ago. I had just finished unpacking boxes of books in my tiny apartment, still a little resentful of how much energy adulthood demanded, and there he was, leaning casually against the kitchen island, laughing like he owned the moment. 26, ambitious, charming, the kind of guy who could make even the most mundane anecdote feel like a headline story. I remember thinking, he's too perfect. And yet, I ignored that little warning bell, convincing myself perfection was rare, and maybe, just maybe, I deserved a glimpse of it. Within minutes, I was laughing at his jokes, sipping my wine, and trading subtle glances that lingered just long enough to set my heart racing. By the time the evening ended, we had swapped numbers. Within 3 months, we were official. I still remember the first time he walked into my apartment like he belonged there, holding a bouquet of flowers that didn't even fit in the vase, but he made it work anyway. By our first anniversary, Matthew had keys to my apartment, a corner of my closet for his jackets, and a permanent place on the couch during movie nights. Looking back, the red flags were there. Tiny things I dismissed as quirks, charm, or stress. He would borrow money, never much, but enough that I noticed, and return it with a casual shrug. He canceled plans at the last minute with vague excuses. Sometimes he disappeared for hours, claiming work calls or errands, and I'd shrug and make excuses for him. I was in love, so I saw only what I wanted to see. The first pang of unease arrived 6 months ago when I received a promotion at work. Senior project manager, a salary bump that meant real financial independence for the first time in my life. I remember celebrating with Matthew at that chic steakhouse downtown. Everything seemed perfect, until he leaned across the table, a smile plastered on his face, and said, "Now that you're making real money, we should start looking at houses. I already talked to a realtor friend about neighborhoods. Oh, and a joint account would make things easier." Something in my chest tightened. The words themselves weren't shocking, but the delivery. It was as if the decision had already been made, and I was just a guest in it. I nodded, smiling weakly, but inside, alarms were going off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the past years in my mind, the little inconsistencies that hadn't made sense until now. How Matthew never talked about his job in detail, yet somehow always had enough cash for dinners, trips, and spontaneous purchases. How he got uncomfortable whenever I asked about his past relationships or family. How small favors like borrowing my car or forgetting his wallet seemed to happen with uncanny frequency. Finally, I called my sister Riley. She's 5 years older than me, a licensed private investigator for 8 years. We weren't particularly close growing up, but after Dad passed 3 years ago, we'd tightened. I hadn't told Matthew she was a PI, just said she worked in corporate security, which wasn't exactly a lie. "Hey, night owl," she answered immediately, her voice sharp and warm at once. "Riley, I need a favor, professional," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll pay your full rate." Her tone shifted instantly. "This about Matthew?" I swallowed, letting out a shaky laugh. "Yes and no. Something feels off." I told her everything. The sudden push for a house, the joint account suggestion, the little inconsistencies. I could hear her mind ticking. "All right," she said finally. "I'll take the case. But we do this by the book. Contract, payments, the whole deal. And you better be prepared for whatever I find. You're not imagining this." It was a reassurance and a warning, the kind Riley always gave. The first few weeks of surveillance were subtle. Riley visited me at my apartment while Matthew was at work, chatting like two sisters catching up. Matthew seemed to buy it, laughing at their shared jokes, showing her the same charm he had shown me. Meanwhile, Riley was cataloging every word, every gesture, every minor inconsistency. Within days, the hits started coming. Matthew had 3 different stories about where he went to college. 3. Depending on whom he was talking to, he'd mention a state university, a northern private school, or an online program. The names he gave for his mother changed too, like flipping through a Rolodex of identities. His job? Not what he had told me. Riley couldn't verify his employment at the marketing firm he claimed, and casual social media checks suggested unemployment. Each revelation felt like a fresh stab, yet Matthew's charisma remained. He laughed, flirted, and made me believe in him, even as evidence stacked silently in my sister's careful records. By the second month, Riley had enough to write a small novel. She found indications of another woman, mysterious Tuesday and Thursday outings to a distant part of town, and social media evidence of new friends who didn't exist, or at least didn't exist in the way Matthew described. I felt sick, heartbroken, and angry all at once. Love and betrayal warred inside me, leaving a bruising haze I couldn't shake. And still, Matthew continued to push the narrative of shared life, houses, and joint finances, blissfully unaware, or cleverly pretending, to be oblivious to my growing doubts. I couldn't confront him yet, not until I had the full picture, until I could prove that my gut instincts were right. And deep down, I knew that picture would change everything. The night I finally pieced together the first undeniable evidence, I sat alone on the balcony, the city lights flickering beneath me like 1,000 tiny truths. I can't believe I almost missed this. I almost trusted him blindly. My fingers trembled as I dialed Riley again. "We need to be ready," I whispered. "I think it's worse than I thought." The air felt heavier that night, thick with anticipation, fear, and heartbreak. And I realized something crucial. The Matthew I thought I knew didn't exist. Not the way I imagined him, not the way I loved him. I had fallen for a shadow, and now the hunt for the truth had begun. I kept pretending everything was normal, and Matthew played his part flawlessly, charming, attentive, convincing me I was overthinking. But every time he suggested a new apartment, a joint account, or even casually mentioned our future, a cold pit opened in my stomach. I had a sinking feeling I couldn't shake. It was worse because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust him. But my instincts, sharpened by years of making calculated choices, refused to let me ignore it. That evening, I found myself staring at my reflection in the kitchen window, the city lights glimmering behind me, and thinking, how could someone so perfect hide this much? Riley had begun the investigation quietly, methodically. Every outing Matthew claimed was accounted for. Every story cross-checked. She sent updates with a casual professionalism that belied the storm they revealed. "Matthew's interesting," Riley said during one of our lunches, flipping through her notebook with a practiced hand. "Really? Interesting how?" I asked, forcing a laugh. She looked at me with one of those piercing stares that made it impossible to lie. "He has 3 different college stories," she said. 3 different last names for his mother. And his job at Branson Marketing? Non-existent. I felt my stomach twist. I thought I was being paranoid, I admitted. I thought maybe it was just inconsistencies. Stress, maybe? "Night owl," she said, using her old nickname for me. "When your gut screams this loud, it's usually not paranoia. It's a warning." And she was right. The next weeks were a blur of careful observation. Matthew continued his subtle manipulation. He dropped real estate listings on my laptop when I wasn't looking, casually referenced shared financial goals, all while his stories crumbled behind closed doors. Riley's updates arrived like clockwork, each one darker than the last. He had another woman. That much became clear when Riley traced his Tuesday and Thursday trips to an apartment across town. Every visit lasted roughly 2 hours. He left with freshly styled hair, perfect makeup, and an air of satisfaction that felt unbearably intimate. No, he wouldn't. Not like this, I told myself, trying to force denial. But Riley's next update made my denial crumble. "She's got 3 different backstories," Riley said over coffee one morning. "Different jobs, different addresses, different stories about her family. I've been following her online. The things she's doing, credit applications, fake names, it's all calculated." My hand shook around the coffee cup. The woman he was seeing wasn't just a fleeting affair. She was organized, deliberate, and dangerous. And Matthew? He was the willing participant. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my actions. I needed proof. And Riley, meticulous as ever, was gathering it. Photographs, videos, receipts, screenshots of messages, everything. Each piece confirmed what I feared. Matthew's carefully curated life was built on lies, and I was standing in the middle of it, unaware for too long. But despite the growing evidence, he never suspected a thing. He would laugh, tease, and flirt as if nothing had changed. He brought me coffee in bed on weekends. He kissed me in ways that made my chest ache with longing. And all the while, I hated him for it, for making me fall in love with a man who didn't exist. One evening, I confronted him, carefully choosing my words. "Matthew," I said, trying to sound casual as we sipped wine on the balcony, "how long have you been honest with me about your job?" He raised an eyebrow, playful, confident. "Honest? Of course I've been honest. What are you talking about?" I wanted to scream. "Don't lie to me. I know you've been hiding things. Your marketing firm, the trips you take on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You're not at work, are you?" He laughed softly, brushing my hand. "Night owl, you're imagining things. I work hard. You know that. Maybe you're just stressed with your promotion. It's a big change, you know?" But his smile didn't reach his eyes, and I saw it. A flicker of something, almost imperceptible, like a crack in a mask. Riley's next report confirmed what I had begun to suspect. "He's hiding more than you think," she wrote. "This isn't just a fling. He's running a pattern. Credit cards, addresses, even names. It's manipulation, Amelia. It's deliberate." I spent that night pacing the apartment, the city below a blur of lights and shadows. How could I have been so blind? I thought about every canceled plan, every borrowed dollar, every vague excuse, and realized it had all been part of the same story, a story he wanted me to believe. By the end of the week, I had made a quiet decision. I would confront him, but not blindly. I needed the evidence, the undeniable proof. The confrontation had to be precise, cinematic, devastating, and final. Even as I planned, my mind couldn't stop racing. I remembered our first date, his laugh, the way he listened, the way he made me feel seen. And I hated him for taking that from me, loved him, and hated him, all in the same heartbeat. For the first time in our relationship, I realized the love I felt could no longer shield me from the truth. It was time to step out of the illusion he had crafted. And when the truth comes, it will change everything. By now, pretending that everything was fine had become exhausting. Matthew's charm was relentless, and it made me doubt my own senses. Every laugh, every casual touch, every whispered compliment seemed engineered to keep me off balance. But Riley's updates cut through the fog like a scalpel, precise and unforgiving. "Amelia," she said during one of our clandestine lunches, sliding her tablet across the table. "I've got more. Brace yourself." The photos scrolled past, a timeline of Matthew's duplicity. There he was, leaving a building across town on a Tuesday, hair freshly styled, walking confidently as if he had nothing to hide. Texts and screenshots followed, messages that disappeared too quickly for him to recall, conversations with someone who wasn't me. Every detail fit into a puzzle I didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. "He has a pattern," Riley continued. "Every Tuesday and Thursday. Apartment visits, interactions with a woman who doesn't exist in your world, multiple aliases, financial manipulations. He's not just cheating, he's orchestrating a life for himself that excludes you while keeping you close enough to trust him blindly." I gripped my coffee cup until my knuckles turned white. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me dangling over an emotional chasm. How could someone I loved, who smiled at me every morning, be living an entirely separate life? That night, I replayed every interaction in my mind. The late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related. The subtle mentions of people who didn't appear on social media or in his photos. The small, seemingly innocuous favors that now looked like calculated tests of my trust. Riley's reports became my lifeline. She documented everything meticulously. Financial transactions, hidden social media accounts, discrepancies in his work history, and most damningly, evidence of another woman. Her surveillance had captured hours of their meetings, faces, gestures, even the stolen intimacy that Matthew had never shared with me. "I can't believe I let this happen," I whispered to myself one night, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. I wanted to cry, to scream, to demand answers from the man I thought I knew. But more than anything, I wanted control. I wanted clarity. The tension built gradually, a slow burn that left me emotionally raw. Matthew's obliviousness, or perhaps his confidence that I couldn't see through him, was infuriating. He continued to bring up houses, joint accounts, and our future, completely unaware that the foundation of our relationship was crumbling beneath his feet. It all came to a head when Riley discovered a set of transactions that made my blood run cold. Credit cards, applied for under multiple names, tied to my address, with no intention of repayment. Not only was he cheating emotionally, but he was using our life together as a tool for manipulation, leveraging my financial stability to fuel his secret life. The confrontation had to be precise. I couldn't allow anger or tears to give him the upper hand. Riley and I mapped it all out. The evidence, the timeline, the undeniable proof. Every lie, every omission, every manipulation was cataloged. By the time I finally faced him, I would have the clarity and confidence to dismantle the persona he had built so carefully. In the days leading up to the confrontation, I noticed subtle changes in Matthew. He seemed restless, a flicker of uncertainty in his otherwise unshakable demeanor. Perhaps he sensed that I was no longer naive. Perhaps he knew the walls he had built were beginning to crack. I spent hours rehearsing in my mind the words I would say, the tone I would keep, the composure I would maintain. Every interaction with him became a test, a way to measure whether he was still the man I loved or the manipulator I had discovered. One evening, he came home with a grin, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "For you," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "I thought you could use a little surprise after your long day." I smiled politely, accepting the gesture but keeping my mind elsewhere. This is it, I thought. Everything leads to this moment. The flowers, the charm, the words, they meant nothing compared to the truth I now held in my hands. The night before the planned confrontation, I sat in my apartment with Riley's files spread across the dining table. Receipts, photos, screenshots, timelines, and maps covered every inch. I traced the paths, the meetings, the lies. My hand trembled, not with fear, but with a mix of grief and resolve. I loved him, I admitted quietly, and that doesn't mean I have to forgive him. Sleep was impossible. Every sound in the apartment seemed amplified, every shadow a reminder of the deception I was about to unveil. And when morning came, I knew there was no turning back. Matthew would either face the truth or watch as the world I had built for us came crashing down. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time before leaving for Riley's office. My reflection was resolute, hardened by betrayal, but tempered with clarity. I was no longer a woman blindly in love. I was a woman armed with truth, ready to reclaim her life. "This is the end of the illusion," I whispered, stepping out into the crisp morning air, "and the beginning of something entirely new." The apartment door closed behind me, the familiar click sounding heavier than usual. Matthew was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone, completely at ease. For a moment, I felt a twinge of the old warmth, before reality slammed into me like a freight train. I took a deep breath, holding the folder of evidence against my chest. Each photo, each screenshot, every receipt, it all screamed the same truth. Matthew's charm was a mask, his love a performance, and I was nothing more than an audience to his carefully orchestrated deception. "Matthew," I began, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, quickly replaced by a casual grin. "Everything okay?" he asked. "You look intense." I opened the folder, sliding the first set of photos across the coffee table. "I know about the other woman," I said simply. "The lies about your job, the credit cards, the trips, the manipulation. I know everything." For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered. Then he leaned back, brushing his hair from his forehead, trying to appear nonchalant. "Amelia, you're overreacting. It's not what it looks like." I felt a sharp pang, a mix of anger and disbelief. "Not what it looks like? Matthew, these aren't guesses or feelings. This is documented. This is reality. And you've been living a double life while pretending to build a future with me." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand, silencing him. "No, this isn't about excuses. I trusted you. I loved you, and you lied. Every day, you chose deception over honesty." He shifted uncomfortably, his mask cracking just enough to reveal vulnerability, or perhaps just panic. It's complicated. You wouldn't understand. I never wanted to hurt you. We are connected." I laughed bitterly, a sound I barely recognized. "Connected? You used me, Matthew. You built a life in parallel, hiding everything from me while asking me to invest my heart and my money into your illusions. You manipulated me for months, years, if I think back." His eyes darted to the folder, the weight of the evidence finally sinking in. "Amelia, No," I interrupted, voice unwavering. "You don't get to justify this. You don't get to twist reality to suit your story. I've seen it. I've traced every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move, and now you face the truth." He sank into the couch, defeated, and for a moment, the man I loved, or thought I loved, was gone, replaced by someone small and human. The power had shifted, and I felt it in every fiber of my being. "You're done here," I said, pointing to the door. "You're not living in my apartment anymore. You don't have access to my life, and you don't get to manipulate me again." He tried to argue, tried to guilt me, but every word bounced off the armor I had built over the past months of investigation and heartbreak. I didn't mean for this," he whispered, voice cracking. "Intentions don't matter, Matthew. Actions do, and your actions speak louder than any excuses." I handed Riley's folder to him, letting the weight of his own deception press down. Every lie, every hidden truth, documented and undeniable. Read it, understand what you've done, and know that I will not be fooled again. For hours afterward, Matthew remained silent, leaving me alone with the reality of what I had endured and overcome. When the door finally closed behind him, I felt an unfamiliar calm, a clarity that had eluded me for months. I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but resolute. Riley joined me later, her presence a comforting reminder that I had not faced this alone. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "Not just by confronting him, but by protecting yourself. You didn't just uncover the truth, you reclaimed your life." I nodded, letting the weight of relief wash over me. The love I had for Matthew didn't vanish overnight, nor did the sting of betrayal, but it no longer held power over my decisions. I had choice now, control now, and a path forward that belonged solely to me. Weeks later, life began to normalize. Matthew moved out, the apartment felt lighter, and the echoes of manipulation faded into memory. Riley's investigation had not only exposed the lies, but had shielded me from financial and emotional ruin. I even found a strange sense of closure in connecting with Antonio, the other man involved, who had been equally deceived. Together we shared a silent understanding. We had been victims of a masterful charade, yet we survived. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. The trust I once gave freely to Matthew would not return lightly, but the trust in myself, my instincts, my judgment, my ability to see truth from illusion, had never been stronger. "Love is a risk," I whispered to myself one evening, gazing out at the city lights. "But deception is a choice, and I will never let anyone choose that for me again." Life moved forward, slowly, painfully, and beautifully. I rebuilt the corners of my world Matthew had tried to manipulate. I laughed again, genuinely, without fear of the shadow of lies lurking behind every word. And in that freedom, I discovered something I hadn't realized before. Resilience could feel like love too.